Hi, everybody. So, I'm a huge reader. I love to read. I always have about 4 or 5 books going, a few on my e reader, some audiobooks to keep me company in the car. And since I've embarked on this journey of death acceptance and positivity, I've been reading a lot of great books about the end of life, mostly philosophies and theories. After my mom died in 2021, I found great comfort in reading books about death and dying. But one that really knocked my socks off is a book called Influencing Death: Reframing Dying for Better Living by a hospice nurse who is quite famous on Instagram and TikTok, named Penny Hawkins Smith. I loved her reels and clips so much that I wanted to hear more from her. When I opened the book, I fell in love. The honesty, vulnerability, and sheer wisdom that she presented made me wish she lived closer so we could hang out, grab a cup of coffee. We had some things in common: sobriety, an interest in death and dying, and she was out there educating people about what to expect at the end of life, talking about fears of death, and being quite hilarious while she was at it. I believe we call that gallows humor in our line of work. I was thrilled when she said yes to Abode's invitation to be our keynote speaker this fall for our annual volunteer and staff training. And I am super stoked to be talking to her today on this podcast. Welcome to Before You Go, the official podcast of Abode Contemplative Care for the Dying. At Abode, our mission is that we live in a world where death is not feared, and we live fully until we die. And we'd like to make that happen before we go. I'm Natalie Buster, yoga, volunteer, and doula director at Abode in San Antonio, Texas. Welcome to Before You Go. Welcome, Nurse Penny.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for that fantastic introduction. Thank you so much.
You are quite welcome. Thank you for writing such an amazing book. I mean, I couldn't put it down. And I love about how much your wisdom and what you talk about in this book really reflects what we all believe at Abode. And so it's just a perfect fit.
Thanks. I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah. So for those of our viewers and listeners who don't know you, tell us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
So I'm a nationally certified hospice and palliative care nurse. I've been a hospice nurse for about 20 years, and I have worked in inpatient hospice care settings, which are similar to Abode, I believe. And I have worked in home hospice as a case manager. I've worked in education, regulatory, and quality. I'm currently a quality assurance RN for a hospice agency. I work 3 days a week, and I have my foot out the door. I am going to be retiring from my job in June. And I am also a social media influencer, or content creator is now kind of the new language, is content creator. We've gone from being influencers to content creators. I still like the terminology influencer because I really do believe that I am influencing people to look at death and dying in a more positive light. And that's what I've been doing for about the last 5 years on various social media sites, TikTok and Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, just kind of teaching people not to fear death and dying and what to expect when someone is dying.
Oh, yeah. Listeners, if you haven't checked out her social media channels, please do yourself a favor. I love that you have a little something for everybody. So, for people with really short attention spans, you're dancing, you're pointing at different things. And I feel like you really get across to people who are just looking to normalize death and maybe who don't feel comfortable having those conversations in their own community.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I that has been my goal from the start, was to try to reach as many people as I could. I didn't want to box myself into just one area of educating, because I recognize that, adult learning, people learn in different ways. And I know that I have a very short attention span, so I really like doing the quick little clips. But also, a couple things. Death is a dark topic. I like to lighten it up. And sometimes, when we are talking about something that is scary, it's better to get it in a little digestible chunk rather than a whole huge, monologue about what to expect. So I try to mix it up and add some humor sometimes, and sometimes I do just the straight talk, and sometimes it's all the inspo, but I just have had a lot of fun finding different ways to be creative when teaching people about hospice and death and dying.
You do such a great job of it. I love how you also, you have the humor, like we said, the gallows
Gallows
humor.
humor. I always forget that terminology, by the way. I say dark humor, and yesterday, for the life of me, I was trying to remember what is it? What is it? And then finally, somebody in the comment section was like, "It's gallows humor." It's like, oh, that's right.
Yeah, yeah, got that. But you also juxtapose that with some really heartfelt and beautiful clips and reels. There was one that really made an impression on me where you were reconnecting with your father who had passed away, and I thought that was such a beautiful way to look at death and to address the grief that comes after a death even years and years later. And just like having that hug, that virtual hug, I thought that was just such a beautiful offering.
I think it's important to show all the sides. I mean, one of the things I always say is death does not have to be scary, even when it's always going to be sad. We're always going to be sad when somebody dies, but we don't have to be afraid. And so I think it's important to show all those sides, the sides of grief. And, sometimes people will say, that they think that I've become desensitized to death, or, because I am somebody who likes to do the gallows humor, making the kind of funny videos to make fun of death. And I like to show that no, you can be both, because that's what it's like to be with somebody who's dying and to be with their family. It's like life. It's all happening in real life, even though it's all about death, and life is a mix of things. It's sadness, and there's times of joy, and we find humor is a great coping mechanism. And really, that's one of the reasons that I have gone in that direction, is because I've, for one thing, always been kind of funny. Anyway, my mom used to say I should be a comedian, but being with families when they are going through this time that is arguably going to be the worst time in their life, I have experienced where there have been these moments of humor and fun and joy, and so I'm not one of these hospice nurses that are going to say it's really emotionally sad work all the time. I say it's fun. It's fun to be able to be with somebody and help them through this process, and to be allowed to be into their space where they're being vulnerable and real.
What it also does is that it normalizes those feelings because I'm sure people feel guilt for having the humor during what's supposedly a very sad, and sometimes people think it should be a very dark time. They sometimes feel guilty for having that giggle or that, off-color joke.
Yes, yes, absolutely. I remember when my son was, oh, he was probably 12 or 13 years old. And I don't remember who it was that died, but he was told that somebody died. And he kind of, his reaction was almost kind of smirking in a way. And I knew that he wasn't like happy that that person died. It was just his response was that, like, you can't control how you grieve or what your grief response is like. And so I think it's important to be able to normalize that not everybody cries when they're grieving. And when my own family was grieving the death of my dad, we had just a roller coaster of emotions happening. And one minute we're all sobbing and heartbroken and just, crying our hearts out. And the next minute we're making jokes, and my brother flung my bra up on the chandelier in the kitchen, and we had just spent the night camping out on the living room floor on mattresses and had cried ourselves to sleep and woke up in the morning and saw that bra, trying to figure out what that is, and then finally figured it out, and we're cracking up. I mean, it is really how things go when someone's dying. Grief is multifaceted, you know, and there's no right or wrong way to grieve. You grieve how you grieve.
Oh, that's such an excellent point, and I think people need to hear that. I think it's so beautiful to, like I said, normalize it, to share your examples from your own personal life and the people that you've had the honor to serve, and to let people know that this is normal. This is going to happen to us all. You're either going to lose someone you love, or you're going to be the one that your loved ones lose. And so being able to talk about it and having this platform, this arena to discuss these things is so valuable. You, like I said in the intro, you are the author of this amazing book, Influencing Death. It's a beautiful memoir that weaves your personal history with the stories of people that you've served as a hospice nurse. And I'm curious, what compelled you to put these stories to paper and create this book?
Well, my mom used to tell me I had a book in me because my life was quite had a lot of interesting things that happened in my life. But I started writing stories about my hospice patients early on. So, 18, 19 years ago, I've been a hospice nurse for 20 years. So 18, 19 years ago, I started putting pen to paper and writing these stories down. About 2018 or so, I found this website that Amazon had where you could write your stories into this format that would make it into a screenplay, and they would select amateur screenplays to produce. So I started doing that, and I was talking to my sister about it, and I was like, this is really something I'm passionate about because I think that TV and the movies don't portray death and dying, natural death and dying, like it really is. There's no hospice nurse shows on TV. So I thought this was really important. So I started kind of doing this. And then Amazon got rid of the whole thing. They were like, yeah, we're not going to do this anymore. So I shelved it for a while. And then in 2020, I got on to TikTok. And after I started getting quite a few followers, a lot of them were telling me I should write a book. And at a point where I had, enough followers telling me that and following me, I thought, maybe I should write a book. And as far as determining how I wanted to write this as a memoir, I felt like it was really important to share the things that I've shared on my social media in my book. And I have allowed myself to be vulnerable and really honest about who I am in my journey on my social media because I want people to trust that when I tell them that they don't need to be afraid of death and dying, that I'm being really honest and that I'm authentically who I say I am. And so it's like giving them pieces of me that other people might be more reticent to disclose, allows them to kind of see me for who I really am. I just thought that was important. And so since I did it on my social media, I thought I really need to do this in my book as well. I feel like it's inspirational. And then that was the response that I got too, when I first made a story about revisiting my alcoholism and exposing myself for having been sober in my youth for 8 years and then starting drinking again and now becoming sober again. I kind of actually shared that because I needed the accountability. I thought if I tell people that, it'll help me be more accountable and I'll stay sober. And it worked too, by the way. And having people like appreciating that and saying, wow, thanks for sharing that. I've been thinking about quitting, or I just quit myself, or whatever. Or having people come in my comments and say, I wish that I could be a hospice nurse, but I'm too old. I'm 40 or I'm 35 or I'm whatever. Or I had people come in my comments and say, I wish I could be a hospice nurse, but I'm already 30. I'm too old for nursing school. And so I'd make a video and say, I was 40 years old when I went to nursing school. 40. So you're never, and people's response to that was, oh my gosh, wow, thank you so much. And people telling me, I am a hospice nurse because of you, or I had a good experience with my person dying because of you, just really inspired me to really have the book kind of reflect what I've already been sharing on my social media.
Oh, and it does such a great job because I think this also reach a different audience than you would with your social media channels. I'm just thinking about, the people that volunteer at Abode, and not all of them are on TikTok. And so being able to read your stories and that and that vulnerability that you share. You made an excellent point. It's like that vulnerability really allows people to trust you. So when you invite them to then talk about their mortality and talk about death acceptance and positivity, they'll have that conversation with you, and then they'll have the conversation with other people in their community. The one thing that really affected me too, because I have a similar sobriety story. So I was sober for 5 years, and then I started drinking again, and I was unsober for about 5 years. And it was the accountability that helped me. I call it my sobriety 2.0, but it really helped me to stay on that path by telling others and having that accountability. And I'm curious because you and I now are, we're both in death care. How has the journey with your sobriety influenced the work that you've done with people at the end of life?
So interestingly, I have not done work with people since I became sober for the second time around. I've been in quality the whole time. So during my time as a hospice nurse caring for patients, I drank. I was a functional alcoholic. I never drank on work nights. I drank on the weekends. I just drank to excess every weekend. So it didn't really impact how I cared for people, but caring for those people impacted how I felt about my own alcoholism. And so for all those years, and so my period of unsobriety was quite a lot longer than yours. I think I want to say I was sober for 8 years, and then I was unsober for 25 years or 30 years, for a long time as a functional alcoholic. I had a harder time recognizing that there was a problem the second time around because I was a successful nurse. I was a mom. I was, I didn't have all the jail and the drugs and everything that I had before. So I had a harder time recognizing that I had a problem. But taking care of those patients who were dying because of their alcoholism really helped me to see that this was something I needed to address. And I tried, and my husband is also a functional alcoholic. And we tried everything. We tried managing our drinking in a number of different ways. And it really wasn't until that point where I was actually away from the bedside already and reflecting on all the patients that I cared for, and knowing that we were going to make a big life change and retire and move to our cabin in the mountains, and that we really just needed to stop drinking. And then, like say, the accountability is everything. That was what did it for me, was announcing it to everybody that I was 3 months sober when I announced it on TikTok. I was like, have something to tell you all. I'm an alcoholic, and you know so a lot of people will ask me, well, how did that impact you or caring for patients? And it never did. It never affected that. They like I said, they impacted me. They helped me to understand that I had a problem.
I think that's so wonderful. Like we learn so many wonderful life lessons from the people that we serve. And you talk a lot about that in the book. In fact, you use the phrase and there but for the grace of God go I, because you saw firsthand what an alcohol problem does to a body. You saw it there with the person that you were serving.
I still drank for another probably 18, 19 years after that, because that particular situation with that woman was a couple years into my hospice nursing career. So it still took me a long time after that, but it chipped away at me to see what was happening.
Yeah, and then it like planted those seeds, like you said, so that now, as reading the book and your accountability on social media, you can share those lessons with others. And so people maybe like me who are newer in that sobriety 2.0 can go, yeah, good point in helping others in that way too.
But I will say that my earlier experiences with drugs and alcohol in jail and all of the things that I did when I was younger to really screw up my life did help me to be able to care for my hospice patients. And that might even be what you were kind of getting at, is that it's a lot easier to have empathy and compassion for other humans when you yourself have gone through a period of time where you felt like you failed in humanity. And I think that is what made me be able to do this work of caring for people and without without judgment, with so much compassion is to be able to know that we all are human and we all have a past, and I don't really care about what happened in that person's past. I'm there with them for this moment. They've had a whole lifetime before I came into the picture. My job is to make sure that this ending part of their life is as good as it can be. And I do think that having this knowledge that I myself was in this place of darkness for so long can care for people no matter what they're going through or no matter what they've been through.
I sometimes like to think that death is the great equalizer. Like it doesn't matter.
I always think that. I always think that. And I took care of a patient one time who was a sex offender in Washington State. We have a little island called McNeil Island, and it is for sex offenders. And he was at our care center and he was actively dying. And the guard was at the bedside with him. And I said, wow, he must have done something really bad for you to have to still be here, because this guy ain't going nowhere. I mean, he's like on his last hours of life. And the guard said, you don't even want to know what he did. And I walked out of the room and I thought to myself, I don't want to know what he did because I need to be able to do my job and take care of this man and make the end of his life be as comfortable as it can be, no matter what he did in his life, because we all deserve to have some kind of peace at the end of life. And if we don't deserve it, then, like you say, death is the great equalizer, right? He's getting the ultimate, I don't know if you want to call it punishment, but I mean, he's going to die and that's going to be it. And he's not going to hurt anybody anymore.
And in a sense, it's the great reset too. I mean, whatever you believe happens after we die, this is done.
Yeah, I like that. That's a great way of putting it. The reset. Yeah, because I do kind of have that belief that there is something else that's going to happen after this time and resetting. Yeah.
That's such a great reminder too, because, like you said, we all have histories, we all have things that we're ashamed of. And do we need to be defined by that in our final breaths? And it's so lovely that you can see beyond that. So there's something interesting that you bring up in your book that is something that is illegal in Texas, but I would love for our listeners and our viewers to know more about something called MAID. I wonder if you can tell us a little bit about MAID.
MAID is medical aid in dying. And it's also been called death with dignity. And some people used to refer to it as physician assisted suicide. And we don't call it that anymore because it's really not suicide. MAID is for people who have a terminal condition with a life expectancy of 6 months or less, and they are able to legally and safely obtain medications to end their life on their terms when they determine that they want to do it. It's legal in 10 states and the District of Columbia. It used to be you had to be a resident of the state to be able to do MAID. In fact, there was a famous story about a young woman who had to move to Oregon. She had brain cancer. She had to move to Oregon and become a resident of Oregon in order to do MAID. Of course, that's not feasible for everybody. And last year, 2 states, Oregon and Vermont, passed a law to where you do not have to be a resident of that state to be able to do MAID. So it's progressing, but it's definitely something that's being legislated in other states all the time. Compassionate Choices is a big group that is always trying to legislate this. So it's trying to be legal in other states as well. But it's a peaceful death, and also something that's important that people ask me all the time when I talk about this in my videos is life insurance pays out when somebody does MAID, and the cause of death on the death certificate is the person's terminal diagnosis. We really differentiate medical aid in dying from suicide, and this is why we went away from that physician-assisted suicide terminology, because someone who dies by suicide is living and they're making a choice to die, and somebody who is dying by MAID is dying and they're making a choice of when they're going to die. So there's a huge difference, and we like to really remove the stigma from MAID that's associated with suicide.
Oh, I think that's so important to have that delineation because you're right. I think people, we think about I had a dog and she was suffering and she was at the end of her life and we administered euthanasia on her. And well, we didn't, but we hired someone to do it. And it was brought up in a meeting today, like we treat our pets better than we treat our people.
If I had a nickel for every time somebody wrote that in my comment section, I would be rich.
Yeah, I mean, it seems so humane to give people that choice to die with dignity and to die on their own terms, especially when they have a terminal illness. They're already dying.
I want to make a distinction between euthanasia and MAID too, because euthanasia is when somebody administers the medication, and that is not legal in any state. The person has to self-administer the medication. Somebody can mix it up for them. It's a drink, it's a cocktail, but they have to be able to drink it or pour it in their peg tube or put it in their rectal catheter port. They have to be able to do that themselves. So it is not euthanasia. Euthanasia is not legal anywhere in the United States.
Thank you for making that clarification because I think it's the more education around this that will encourage people to, rally behind this cause and really fight for it. So thank you so much for chatting about that a little bit. I've always been curious about it because, we don't have it here in Texas, but it's definitely something that is of interest. So
Well, funny enough, I was doing a podcast yesterday with somebody who I don't know where they live. Clearly, they don't live in a MAID state. But he said, there should be a way for people to be able to just end their own lives when they're terminally ill. And it took me aback because I've never met anybody who didn't know about MAID. I was surprised, and so now you're the second person in 2 days who's like, not everybody knows about it, and I'm like, "Oh, you're right, not everybody does," and I really thought everybody knew about it, even if it's not legal in their state. I thought it was pretty widely known that there are some states where this is allowed. So it is important to educate because there might be somebody in Texas who wants to do MAID, and now they know they can go to Vermont or Oregon and do that, or they might be willing to, like try to get on the bandwagon to legislate that in your state.
the more I spend time in this world of death positivity, the more I realize that people don't know a lot about their rights, their death rights, and what they need to do, what they should do, what they have access to, especially when it even comes to hospice. I think there are so many misconceptions around what hospice is and what hospice provides. And I wonder, what's the one thing that you wish more, or a few things, it doesn't have to just be one, that you wish more people knew about hospice?
Well, I wish more people understood that hospice is not for people who are at the very end of their life. It's not for the last hours to days. It's really for somebody who has a life expectancy of 6 months or less. And people can stay on longer than 6 months if they continue to meet that requirement of a life expectancy of 6 months or less. We don't kick them off at 6 months. People think that when somebody goes on hospice, it's the end. And they're right, but it's not that it wouldn't be the end if they didn't choose hospice. They're still going to die with or without hospice. And in fact, hospice has been shown to allow people to live longer at the end of their life. There's been a couple of studies that have been done that prove that people who go into hospice can actually live longer. And even if they don't live longer, they live better because they're able to focus their attention on being in the moment, being with their family, avoiding the hospital, avoiding the ER, and doing, what really makes them happy, checking off the bucket list, eating what they want to eat and celebrating. And, I love the people that do the living wakes where they're celebrating their life. They're doing their life celebration before their death. They get to participate in it. I can't think of anything that I'd rather do.
Yeah, they hear all those great things that people are saying about them.
Right, yeah, and it helps to acknowledge that you're dying to go on hospice so that you can have conversations and closure and be able to, you know, if you're the dying person, hopefully your family is going to tell you what you meant to them, because at the end of the day, most people want to know that their life had meaning and purpose. So that's a real biggie, and I understand the misconception. It's a vicious cycle because what happens is people are afraid that hospice is going to make them die faster, so they wait to the end, they go on hospice, and then they die. And then people are like, my mom went on hospice, she started the morphine, then she died 2 days later. So they think it was hospice that made them die, where it's just that they waited too long, or the doctors waited too long to refer them. That's another misconception I think is really important to dispel, is you do not need a doctor's referral to go on hospice. You can self-refer. You can call hospice yourself and say, I have cancer. I don't want to go through treatment. The oncologist isn't willing to talk to me about any other options, and hospice will do the evaluation and let you know if you meet the eligibility criteria.
I think that's so important to know because I don't think I even knew that before I read your book and I saw it in there. But people feel like they have to do whatever their doctor says. And the doctors are great. I mean, we have the best medical system in the world, but the doctors, their job is to keep you alive and to do everything within their power to keep you alive. And when you are at the end of life, sometimes those life-saving techniques or those curative treatments just don't work anymore. And so it's nice to know that people can self-refer if their oncologist or if their surgeon's like, no, one more try, let's do this other, this other trial or whatever, that you do have agency over your choices, especially when it comes to how you want the final months, weeks, days of your life to be.
Yeah, death is seen as a failure. Medical providers are taught how to save people's lives. And when they aren't able to do that, then they see it as a failure. And like you say, there are things that when somebody is terminally ill are not going to work out well for them, like CPR. And, that's another thing that people are often surprised to know, is that you can be a full code and be on hospice. And what that means is that, and this is where it's important for people to understand. What that means is that if your heart stops beating and you're not breathing anymore, that we will initiate CPR to attempt to restore circulation and to attempt to restore life to you. They're allowed to choose that for themselves and come on hospice. You do not have to have a DNR, do not resuscitate order, which means that we aren't going to do that. But Medicare recognizes that not everybody understands what that really means. And especially in traditional medicine, they're not good at explaining it. And so we don't want to eliminate the opportunity for great end of life care for these people just because they're misinformed about what that really means. We bring them on and we talk to them and we explain that to them. And my social worker was so good at explaining it. She always used to say, if we find you down without a heartbeat or a breath, do you want us to pound on your chest and try to bring you back to life? Or do you want us to just allow a natural death? And when she put it that way, allow a natural death, people were like more willing to discuss that. And there are still some people who, from a certain generation, who grew up seeing the advances in medical procedures that keep people alive for longer than they really would be otherwise, and seem to believe that you can live forever, and just don't even want to talk about it. In their mind, they're just like, no, I just want you to try to do everything to make me live. Even when we explain the consequences of, potentially broken ribs, or the fact that you've got less than 1% chance of us actually restoring life to you, and if we do, you're still dying and your family just witnessed this horrible traumatic thing that happened to you, they still want it. And usually when that happens, the family just says, you know what, don't worry about it. When they die, we're just going to call hospice. We're not going to call the ambulance. Don't worry about, and that has been, the situation for some of my patients. But
Oh, it's so important to educate about that too, because I think you're right. I mean, there's such a desire to want to live forever, right? That we're in this youth obsessed culture. There's all of these new ideas about how to extend your life. We hear it all the time. When you hear about all of that, what does that say to you? Like, what do you think that's coming from?
it's coming from a fear of death. It's coming from, we're always going to fear what's unknown, and we don't really know what happens after we die. And if we don't know much about the dying process, we'll have a fear around that too. That's where it comes from, and I think it's amusing, and people will say in my comments, "What do you think?" And they're in earnest, they say this, "What do you think about when they're finally able to make it so that people live forever?" Or how do you think that it would be good if everybody could just live forever? And I always say, "No." I mean, we've already overpopulated this place. Like, let's let the kids grow up and have kids and let their kids have kids. And there's a time and a place for everyone. What is it? Every season under the sun or something, that one. So like that. I don't know what it is, but point being that we have to move out to give room for the new people. This world only has enough resources to sustain so much life, and we're already getting to a point in some places where that's maxed out. So, and not only that, but I do believe there's something after this, and I want to experience that. And I think that people who really embrace the idea of living forever can't possibly imagine anything beyond this life. Like, they think this is it, and so they want to be in this life forever. And I think those of us who have a different idea about that probably are more comfortable with not thinking we'll live forever. How that being said, I do like the idea of looking young until I die.
Sure, of course, gotta make sure I put my night cream on every night and, make my hair look this way. It's also to me, it's what makes this life so precious is the fact that we will die. So it's you had mentioned before, like living in that present moment and just being present and enjoying everything that this moment gives us. And if we lived forever, I wonder if that would go away, that preciousness.
I think it would, because I don't even think we get it really until we know we're dying. Because even as a hospice nurse, I've definitely done things that I would not have probably thought about doing before. People wait until they're dying to check off their bucket list, and I've got bucket list items that I've already been doing, and like early retirement is one, moving to our cabin in the mountains off the grid, that's another one. Many, many things. My brother and sister and I decided we were going to go on a cruise. We were going to be the cruise of a lifetime, like 10 years ago. Let's go on this cruise of a lifetime. Like, this is a one-time thing. We went on this cruise to Alaska. We loved it so much. We've done it almost every other year since then. It's like there are those things, but I'd love to say I'm not the being a hospice nurse that I recognize how precious and valuable life is, and you shouldn't get spun up over the small things. But I will get upset if there's a spoon stuck in a drawer and I can't get it open.
Yeah.
I mean, there's
Well, you're
things that
human.
yeah, I mean, I get mad about things that are stupid and petty, and I shouldn't get mad about them because I'm human. And I really do think that the only time that you maybe get to that point, and I don't know because I'm not dying yet, but through the eyes of my patients, I've seen where those things just don't matter as much anymore, and you really are focused on what is important to you right now in the moment because that's all you have when you know you're dying. I mean, it's all we have too because we're all dying, and we never know when is going to be our last moment, but it's easier to recognize when you're dying. So, yeah, I absolutely think that if we knew that we could live forever, we would not appreciate life.
I love that you're doing your bucket list now. I think that's such great advice for all of our listeners and viewers too. It's like don't wait. Don't wait until you're on your last breaths and all of a sudden you have this realization that you want to live in the moment and do all these things. Do it now. Do it now.
Yeah.
What is one way that you keep yourself, for lack of a better term, sane while you're working in this line of work? How do you fill your cup?
I am a big time gardener, so I love gardening. That's the way that I commune with nature. I live in the mountains and I'd love to go walking more, but I am an anti exerciser, so I have a hard time dragging myself out. I really appreciate it when I do it. I love sledding in the wintertime. One of the things that was important to me when I did patient care was to really have good emotional boundaries. So, making sure that I didn't take my work home with me. I left it at the job, remembering that I'm there to do a job. This is my career. I am a professional nurse. I am not the family member of this person. I can be attached, but there has to be some level of detachment too, knowing that this is going to be coming to an end, that death is the expected outcome, and also being able to recognize that as a job well done. If I've made them comfortable, if their patient or if their family has been able to understand the dying process and not afraid of what was unfolding for them, then when the death happens, it's a job well done. Being able to have that mindset around the work really helps a lot, because if you get to a place where you're grieving every single patient as if they were your own family member, it's you're not gonna be able to do the work. You can't. You have to recognize that this is your job and these aren't your family. And, I never went to funerals, for my patients. I went to 2 out of thousands. I went to 2. One was my husband's great aunt who ended up in our hospice care center, and the other one was a young woman who I talked about in the book. I helped her 2 daughters bathe her after we got her terminal agitation under control, and was I was very, very close with the family. It was a really intense, close situation, and I felt, for them, I needed to go, and that was kind of the difference too, was I felt like I was going for them and not for myself. If I went to funerals for every patient, that's all I'd ever do. And so leaving the work at work, that's part of it, is not obligating myself to go to every funeral. And I always felt like when it comes to boundaries, I would ask myself, if this is something that I'm going to do for this person, am I going to do it for everybody? And, for the most part, no. If it's no, then it's no. I'm not going to do it for anyone. And then there's very exceptional 2 out of 1,000 circumstances where I did do it. So it was really the exception and not the rule.
I think that's so smart and so wise. Do you have any specific techniques that you use just to signal to yourself or to signal to your nervous system that this is work and this is life? Or is it kind of talking about it in your head?
Inherent in my personality, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, I didn't have anything that I would have to. I think it was just having those boundaries that I knew were in place. I felt so much gratitude for being able to be in this very sacred line of work. That's really what it came down to, I think, is that I recognize that all the time. I didn't have to talk myself down from anything because I was so happy to be doing the work. The Daily Mail did an article about me, and they titled it Hospice Nurse Says She Had Great Fun Taking Care of Dying Patients. I didn't say great fun. I did say fun, but some of the comments, so I went to this article and I looked at the comments in there, and some of the people were just like blasting me. How can you say it's great fun to take care of people that are dying? And clearly they didn't read the article, because the article did go into what really I meant by that, was how fun it was to be able to have a job where I get to meet these people who are at this vulnerable time in their life, and they're sharing that part of their life with me, and I get to see life in action. I get to see humanity happening right in front of me, because people are raw and real when they're going through this. This is like, it's not like everybody's always grieving every single day. There's life happening. People are often laughing and joking, and you get to see just all of the aspects of humanity. And to me, it's fun. That's, I don't know how to explain it any other way. It's not sad, it's rewarding, it's enriching. And that knowledge of that feeling of how enriched I am to be able to do this is what I that's what I had, that I didn't need to signal, it was just always there for me.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so beautiful. The gratitude is, I mean, because it's such a sacred place that we reside in. And to be invited into these special sacred moments, there's a lot to be grateful for in this line of work.
Of course, there's the times where you have the patients and the families who are not in that space of accepting, and during those times, those are a little rougher, but again, you just have to remember that what you're doing is being there to try to help them make the best of it as well as they possibly can. And by and large, it's always a good experience. And then the bad experience, you just have to kind of roll with it and let it roll off your back.
That's great advice. That's great advice. Oh my gosh, I could talk to you all the time. Like I said, I wish you lived closer so we could like hang out.
Well,
But
we'll have
what's
to hang out when I come down there for your
totally, oh my gosh. How can people find you online? How can they know more about you? How can they buy your book?
I have a website, hospicenursepenny.com, and there are links to everything there, but also you can find me on Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok at Hospice Nurse Penny. My book, Influencing Death, Reframing Dying for Better Living, is available wherever books are sold online. There's an audio version that I narrated on Audible or audiobooks. Again, links to all of that. I have a podcast called Death Happens, An Insider's Guide to Dying. I do that with a hospice social worker, and that's wherever pods are found.
Well, Penny, one thing we ask everyone who comes on our podcast is, what do you want to do before you go?
What do I want? Boy, there's so many things that I want to do. The petty part of me wants to hit 1 million followers on TikTok.
We can help make that happen. Come on, everybody, subscribe.
I want to just be able to enjoy every single day of my life with my family for as long as I can before I go.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you for having me on.
This episode is brought to you by Abode's Death Cafe. Our objective is to increase awareness of death with a view to helping people make the most of their finite lives. To learn more about Death Cafe, go to abodehome.org. Isn't she the best? Like I said, I fell in love with her when I saw her on Instagram doing her hilarious, but also very poignant reels about death and dying and her own personal experience in that realm. And then her book, my goodness, y'all. I mean, get this book. It's such a wonderful user guide to the end of life. I mean, really, and just the vulnerability and the personal stories that she weaves in. It establishes that trust. Like, you want to listen to what she has to say about death and dying and the best practices to make sure that your life at the end is just as amazing as the life that you're living now. Thank you for joining us for this episode of Before You Go, the official podcast of Abode Contemplative Care for the Dying. At Abode, we believe death is not a medical event, and we are not medical professionals. We're just sharing our opinions, and these opinions shouldn't be taken as medical advice. You can find us online on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. This episode was edited by Make Your Day Richer.